go ahead and kick this off officially. We still have folks joining in, but my name is Logan Parker, and I'm an ecologist with the Maine Natural History Observatory. I'm also a special species technician with the
Recording in progress.
Maine Bird Atlas. The meeting today will be recorded. I just got my reminder to record, and we'll post that up on the Maine Natural History Observatory YouTube page. Let's see, am I recording? Yes. Okay, great. So it'll be available again later. So this meeting or this presentation is going to have two parts. The first part presented by Dave Brinker, the second by myself, and then we'll have a Q&A period at the end of the presentation. And given the number of folks that we have joining us today, we are going to have people hold their questions for the Q&A, although you can post questions to the chat, and that will be monitored by Glenn Middlehauser and Adrian Leppold, both with the Atlas, and Doug Hitchcock's also with the Atlas. So they may be able to help you with some of those questions, but yeah, we will get to you in the Q&A at the conclusion. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dave Brinker. Dave is an ecologist working down in Maryland, and he's a co-founder of Project Snowstorm, and he's a founder of Project OwlNet. So he's certainly very, very familiar with owls and has worked with owls here in Maine. Very, very knowledgeable guy, and we're excited to have him presenting here tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
This is my part for the course, Dave. I'm gonna interrupt. Can you just explain, explain to folks real briefly what Project OwlNet and Project Snowstorm are for those who might not be familiar?
Sure. Project OwlNet is now a continent-wide network of banding stations that net fall migrant saw-whet owls, and a few of them also work in the spring to get a better understanding of the pathways and that part of the life cycle of saw-whet owls as they move from their northern breeding areas to southern wintering locations. And it's grown from a little idea to now over 125 stations. And the result is that saw-whet owls are now the most banded owl in North America. Project Snowstorm was started by Scott Weidensaul, myself, a couple others back in December of 2013 when there was a massive eruption of young snowy owls into the United States. Larger than had been seen for decades before that. And we decided that we should use the collaborative model that we have from Project OwlNet to try and learn more about snowy owls and how they spend their time when they're down here in the lower 48 with us. It is primarily a collaborative effort to put radio transmitters on snowy owls and learn where they go. And we also organized a collection of images to look at things like, do the ages and sexes distribute themselves differently? We organized veterinarians across the eastern United States because when you have this many owls, a fair number of them get into trouble with things like cars and power lines and stuff like that and end up perishing. And it gave us a way of sampling these owls to get a better idea of their health condition, whether they're carrying viruses, what kind of body shape they're in. You know, are they nice and fat and sassy, or like some people always say they're all starving? Well, one of the outcomes of the veterinary end of Snowstorm is that they are not starving. They are generally, when you get a good sample like this, in pretty good condition. Yeah, occasionally an owl is in bad condition, but most of them are really good. If you want to learn more about either of those projects, you can go on the web. They both have websites. One is projectowlnet.org, and the other one is projectsnowstorm.org. So, that good enough for you, Adrian?
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. I also was just kind of figured that would be a good opportunity to stall for a few minutes as we still have people filtering in, but just to stay on task. We're ready for Owls in Maine. Thank you.
So I presume you can see my screen, right?
We can.
One last reality check there. Okay. Well, I have been working on uncommon species for a lot of my career. You can say owls in some ways are uncommon because they're nocturnal and hard to find. Started out with saw-whets, went to snowy owls, and now I'm trying to sort of motivate some folks in Maine to work on another rare one, but really because of the Maine Owl Atlas here, we need to work on a number of owls in Maine. So I've lived by okay. My slides are not advancing. There you go. Okay. I've lived by this little motto because I work for the Natural Heritage Program in Maryland, where we deal with all the rare things. And you find what you look for. And until you look for something thoroughly, you really can't say it's not there. And this is particularly true with difficult to find things. So just remember that little thing. You find what you look for, and I'm going to try and inspire people to go out and look for some of the less common owls in the state of Maine. So we could spend a lot of time dealing with natural history and introduction to owls and things of that nature. But Logan did a very good job of that a few years ago when he put together the Monitoring Owls in Maine discussion on a similar evening type. And they recorded it, and it's available on the Maine Natural History Observatory website. So I'm just going to refer you to Logan's presentation for the real basics of the different owls that occur in Maine and what their life histories are. And we're going to sort of step it up a little bit and talk about some of the Atlas results so far, along with ideas and techniques and things that you can use to add to the owl records that are in the Maine Bird Atlas. We're going to start with Maine's largest owl, the great horned owl. And the map there with your different colored squares is the distribution of blocks where great horned owls have been documented as part of the atlas. Everything from confirmed down to observed. Observed are birds outside of safe dates, but all the others are within the safe dates as the atlas has set them. One little comment here on safe dates. Safe dates are designed to weed out birds that are not breeding and are, say, migrating or wintering. Seeing as there's a winter atlas, it's applied a little differently in Maine. But most owls are permanent residents and don't migrate. So if you see an owl someplace or hear an owl calling in your backyard, that can become a possible very quickly if it fits the safe dates. But then all you got to do is wait 7 days. And if you hear it on day 8 or later, or hear it again, because you're hearing it again, you're recording in your little mental notebook what we would refer to as a probable. It's probably a breeding bird sitting there going through courtship. And that's a very valid and very valuable observation to make. So while you need to remember safe dates, if you hear calling owls separated by 7 or more days, safe dates really don't matter because that's a resident bird. So when you think of great horned owls, there's a nice distribution here across Maine. You can see they cover pretty much the whole state. I think the dispersion there is related to the difficulties of getting out into some of the remoter areas of Maine. But when I looked at it, it's like, that's pretty good given the challenges of getting into the backwoods of Maine. Great horned owls do not build a nest, and they are generally not cavity nesters. So this is the perfect time to confirm great horned owls. They take over nests of other large birds. In the upper left corner there, you see the great horned owl, the female's incubating there, her little horns sticking up from her head. She's very easy to see. That's probably an old red-tailed hawk nest. And before the leaves come out, as you drive around where you can safely sort of watch the trees or the trees against the skyline, red-tailed hawk, red-shouldered hawk, these larger hawk nests are very easy to find before leaf out. And quite often, one of the things with great horned owls that they are sort of commensurate with red-tailed hawks. The red-tailed hawk will build a nest one spring, raise its young, and then great horned owls start breeding before red-tailed hawks. So they usurp the red-tailed hawk nest. What's the red-tailed do when it comes back to its territory? It builds a nest somewhere nearby, far enough away that it doesn't feel like it's going to get hassled by the great horned owl, and it will breed there. Well, next winter, the two birds will flip-flop again because owls don't build nests. They just keep taking nests over. Other places you can find great horned owls are great blue heron colonies, where they take over great blue heron nests. They've been known to even take over eagle nests. So if you know of stick nests that you can see in the open woodlands this time of year, you should be checking those to try and add great horned owl records to the atlas. But Maine is a little challenged because you have such wonderful conifer cover. You don't have as many open deciduous areas, but you also, when you get into the mountains or away from the coast where you have cliffs, have another opportunity for great horned owls to usurp a nest when they do things like take over the nest of a raven on a cliff face. And if they can find a flat little crevice on a cliff face that's got a little bit of dirt and duff, they may not even need a nest to find a place that they feel secure to lay eggs and raise a family. So don't forget to look at cliff faces, especially if you know that it's a place where there's been a raven one time or another. And great horned owls will even do some rather unusual things. One of the places that we banned saw-whet owls on Assateague Island, there's a little roof over the entryway that had about 6 to 8 inches of pine needles accumulated on top of it. And for several years, a great horned owl decided that that pile of pine needles was just a perfect place to scrape a depression and lay her eggs. And they raised owlets there several years in a row. So think a little bit outside the box and look for these big nests. And before leaf out, this is your time to really go and find great horned owls. And the folks working on owls in the atlas have done pretty well with great horns in Maine. Now we got to get this to... My computer's being a little slow when we do the slide changes here. The next largest owl in Maine is the barred owl, and the barred owl records in the atlas are the densest set of records you have. You've done very well. Barred owls are pretty easy to confirm in the atlas because they're extremely vocal. You can go out in the woods on a nice moonlit night and just listen. And if you are one of those individuals who can use your vocal cords to mimic their call, or if you have a playback, it's easy to get them to respond. Don't abuse playbacks. But the barred owl records in the atlas are very strong, very good. Really don't need to say much about them because the atlasers have been doing pretty well at getting barred owl records. For just sort of the new people, barred owls are cavity nesters. They will almost always be in some sort of large tree cavity. So you won't find them in young forests where the trees are not big enough unless there's a wolf tree or a cull tree that was left. They're always going to be in cavities. If you have barred owls in your neighborhood and you want to try and attract them, they do take to nest boxes. It's got to be a pretty large box because barred owls are not small, but there's been a lot of places where people have done very well with attracting barred owls to their local little area by putting up a nest box. And for those of you that got really keen eyes and you're looking at that nest box, I'm going to admit right now that that's not a photo of a nest box that was taken anywhere in Maine. If you notice the Spanish moss hanging from the leaves and the twigs there, you'll realize that this is a nest box that was put up somewhere in the southeastern United States. But I want to move on to the other ones that are much more of interest to improving the atlas and improving owl monitoring in Maine. And the first one is the Screech Owl. It's another cavity nester. And when you look at Maine right there, you're going to say, well, geez, there's no records. And there really aren't many, but there are a few here. Down in very southern Maine, in the Portland and Wells area, there are 3 records. And I'm going to blow this up a little bit so you can see the blocks. And you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 observations of Screech Owls. Now, if you remember when we started, I mentioned that owls are permanent residents. They're not migratory. All 4 of those observations, at least 2 or 3 of them, would have been really easy to convert to probables by hearing the birds or seeing the birds twice outside of that 7-day window. So this is my encouragement to folks from southern Maine, probably from Portland down south to the New Hampshire border, that Screech Owls are at the edge of their range in southern Maine. But with the changes we're seeing in our climate, our warming winters, less snow, and if you had a snowy winter there in Maine, you might say, well, he's off his rocker. But most of us are experiencing milder winters and lower snow. There's probably many more Screech Owls in southern Maine. People just need to go out and look for them and listen for them. And one of the things that we'll talk about later is the monitoring protocol with a playback for Screech Owls. And this part of Maine is the place where that might be an effective way to produce more observations and hopefully probables and maybe even a few confirms. Like I said, Screech Owls are cavity nesters. They take very well to boxes. So people can put boxes up in appropriate habitat and often find Screech Owls, find them and adopt them and use them. But because Screech Owls really like tree cavities and they come in red and gray phases, this photo or set of photos is set up here to get you to think about taking that gray phase Screech Owl in the right-hand photo, pulling it out of that box and exchanging it with the red phase one in that it's probably a maple tree or maybe a black birch or something like that with that kind of scaly bark. Put that gray phase in that hole. And if you're not looking very carefully, he would be really hard to see. And the red phase in the red colored box might be a little bit more of a challenge. But if you have a box, there's a hole there and you keep checking them out. So what you have to do to find Screech Owl nests is look for holes in trees. And it sounds simple. Where Screech Owls are more abundant further south, they're relatively easy to find by just learning where all the larger trees that have cavities are in your neighborhoods. And I say in your neighborhoods because of the kind of habitat that Screech Owls prefer. let's start a little bit with timing so that if you're looking for screech owls, it's going to be time to start very quickly here. Mid-March, sometimes even early March if you have milder winters. Through April is when they're doing courtship and out there doing their trills and calls at night. Incubation begins in late March, early April, and can go into May. They have a little bit of a protracted breeding period. So, some birds start early and some birds start late. Chick rearing will go from May and into June. So if you see a screech owl sticking its head out of a hole periodically, say in April, you might have a bird that's just roosting, or you may have a bird that's breeding. And the trick would be to come back periodically and see if the bird is always there. And when you get to chick rearing time, the chicks will often go up to the hole and look out just like an adult would. And that would be a very easy confirmation. So here's my little, trying to inspire you to get out there and find screech owls in southern Maine. Habitat affinities, they are not an owl of the deep woods. They are owls of open deciduous woods. The more the canopy closes, the less likely you are to have screech owls. They like woodland edges, and they are particularly fond of urban and suburban areas with large trees where a limb has fallen off and a cavity develops. So they're an owl that does very well living amongst people and the changes we make to the environment around us. It's probably one of the easier owls to find in people's backyards. So I'm going to work my way across a couple other uncommon owls here. Being someone who has done a fair amount of work on saw-whet owls, I was really happy when I looked at the data from saw-whet owls in the Maine Bird Atlas to see that they are very well represented all across the state. There's even records from, the remote areas of northern Maine, the more remote areas of northwestern Maine and the mountains, and then all up and down the coastal areas from southern Maine all the way up to down east. And it warmed my heart to see all those saw-whet owl records. But when you switch over and you look at what kind of records they are, it gets kind of interesting. There are only 6 confirmed records. So those are people who have found birds inhabiting a hole several days in a row, or a fledged brown young bird that's very easy to tell from an adult bird. And it'd be nice to see more of those, but those are pretty hard records to find. Where people can make a difference here is there's a lot of probable or possibles on this map, which are someone was out and they got a response from a saw-whet, maybe doing a nightjar survey route, maybe just being out at night hearing a saw-whet calling. Well, when you hear those call once, if you go back, day 8 or a little bit later and can hear it again, you could turn many of those possibles into probables, which would be a stronger data record for the atlas. So I encourage any of you who are out and you hear a saw-whet to take that little extra bit of effort, wait 7 days or 14 days even, and see if you can go back out and hear the bird again and change your possible record to a probable record. Saw-whet owls, like screech owls and barred owls, are cavity nesters. I've only found one natural saw-whet owl nest in my career. It was in a dead, debarked white pine in the middle of a clear cut in western Maryland. Very similar to these 2 photos, which are photos that atlasers in Maine gathered to attach to their records. The one on the right with the young birds in it is certainly confirmed, and I presume if I got the photo, the one on the left was also a confirmed record because the adult was seen in the hole, spaced out over that critical 7-day window. Saw-whet owls take very well to nest boxes. And when I first moved to Maryland, I was involved in the first breeding bird atlas. I was involved in the second one, and now I'm involved in our third one. But the first breeding bird atlas in Maryland didn't have any confirmed records for saw-whet owls. I was young, I was energetic, I didn't have kids to take up my spare time, so I set about proving that saw-whet owls bred in Maryland. And we went to Western Maryland, and the technique was to put up saw-whet owl boxes in the swamps and see if we could generate a record. And took a few years, but we eventually produced several nest records all in boxes in Western Maryland by putting up a box route. And we're going to talk about the uses of boxes a little bit later. That's part of Logan's contribution to all this. But the first nest record that we had for Maryland was written up in Maryland's state ornithological journal, Maryland BirdLife. And that's the cover of the issue that we wrote it up in. And it was a few-page paper describing habitat and the nest record itself. And I've been pleasantly surprised recently to find that it is cited on quite a few times in the Birds of the World account for saw-whet owls, because it turns out that there's been very little written about the habitats that saw-whet owls are breeding in the eastern or northeastern United States. I'm going to send a PDF of this to the Maine Natural History Observatory that they'll make available for anybody that might want to download it and read now what is a 30-year-old natural history account of the first saw-whet owls breeding in Maine. So you can use boxes, you can use listening, but you're doing a good job with saw-whet owls, and keep getting out there and turn a bunch of those possibles into probables.
What do you mean?
Saw-whet owls, the courtship period begins really soon here, mid-March through about April. Incubation is generally April and May. Chick rearing is May and June. And if you're picking up on the trend as we go through these, owls breed early. Owls often breed while there's snow on the ground. We have been checking saw-whet owl boxes for eggs in April on residual snow cover in Western Maryland. So don't think that you're going to go out in May and June and easily find saw-whets, because by the time there's chicks in the boxes, the birds aren't calling anymore, or chicks in the cavities. You have to literally find the cavity. Habitat affinities for this gorgeous little owl is mixed dense forest habitats. They like dense habitats because they are food for barred owls. And the denser habitat that they are in, the safer they are, and the harder it is for a barred owl to turn a saw-whet owl into a meal. Preferably with conifers for roosting and older deciduous trees that are going to have cavities. They have to have cavities that are created by things like pileated woodpeckers and flickers for nesting sites, or cavities that are created by a branch breaking off a tree and then the interior of the tree rotting to create a natural cavity. They can be in younger spruce fir and deciduous forests if there's those residual older trees that present cavities. They're in Maryland, they are on conifer swamp edges and shrub swamps, think alder swamps. They can hunt very effectively in alders, and then if there's a big old pine snag sticking out there with a woodpecker hole in it, they breed in that woodpecker hole and have safe hunting in all the alders and the swamp conifers. Now we get to the hard ones. Long-eared owls. There are only 4 records that have accumulated so far in the atlas. 1 confirmed, and I'm going to go to that in a minute and show you the confirmation record. 2 possibles, which are just birdsy in habitat or singularly calling in the right time of year. And 1 probable, and I'm going to give Logan a couple of minutes here to chime in and describe how he got his probable record for the atlas here.
Yeah, so Dave he gave me a quick heads up before the presentation that he'd be putting me on the spot with that record. So I tried to pull up my data sheet for that one, and I have not done so yet, but I'll tell you what I recall from both of those. So I had a probable and a possible in generally the same area of the state, both down east, both in some pretty good looking habitat, lots of open areas, and with adjacent dense conifer cover in both cases. In one instance, these were both picked up during nightjar monitoring efforts, I should point out too. So in the case of the possible, I had a calling bird that was vocalizing through the duration of one of my point counts at a distance, and then the probable, which if I remember correctly, I think was coded as C for courtship, but as time goes on, I wonder if that was the appropriate code. It could possibly be A, but in any case, so I had a bird vocalizing at one of my survey points, and it vocalized fairly steadily for the duration of the time that I was stationed there on the road. And then as we were wrapping up, and as I was getting ready to go to the next point, I had the bird right nearby it was either a bill snap or a wing clap, one or the other, quite close by. So it may have been some type of agitated behavior, perhaps an interaction with another bird. But this was late May, and so long-eareds are on the later side among our breeding owls, but it's edging towards the end of their courtship period. But yeah, since then I have been intently listening wherever I go and scanning every dense windbreak that I can find and noting those. And I've not since 2018 found another long-eared, but here's hoping in 2022.
So I'm going to move on to the one confirmed breeding record that the Atlas has produced. It was produced by Bill Sheehan on the 17th of July when he was in northern Maine and happened to spot some long-eared owlets in conifers that had been branching out from their nest, and had a wonderful experience. This is a pretty rare thing for bird atlases to come up with long-eared owl breeding records. But a real shout out to the fact that someone was successful in finding something like that. When you look for long-eared owl nests, again, they don't nest in cavities. They usurp the nests of other species, primarily crows, but they'll take anything. The yellow circle is kind of the situation you might see a nest in. You can see the long-eared owl sitting on top of the nest in the upper left corner. And they can get creative. I mean, people have done things like put platforms out and covered them with sticks and sometimes got long-eared owls. And this one photo I found on the internet of someone who put a basket up in their tree and eventually got a long-eared owl to adopt it as a nest. So, if you're looking for nests, you got to look for old nests. They're going to, find them and try and use them because they're not going to build their own. As far as phenology and habitat goes, courtship starts pretty soon here. A few days from now, roughly, late February, early March, goes through April. That's when the males will be out hooting. It's a very simple hoot. If you go to Logan's presentation from a couple of years ago. You can pick up a call of a hooting long-eared owl there. Incubation starts as early as mid-March to late March. Some of the birds that are later can go into May. Chick rearing is from mid-April through late June. They really like to nest in coniferous situations, sometimes deciduous forest, but when they're in a deciduous forest, they're going to be on the edge of it because they hunt over open lands. Think blueberry barrens, fields, maybe shrublands adjacent to grasslands. If you don't have an open area nearby, you don't really have much chance of finding long-eared owls. They like open forest as far as it makes it easier for them to, get out of the forest and out into the open areas where they hunt. So you need this juxtapositioning of open habitats with nearby coniferous forests. They can be breeding in thicker windbreaks. They can breed in pine plantations on the edge of an open field. That's really the kind of habitat arrangements where you should expect them. And I told Logan I was going to tell him a new secret that I just learned from Scott Weidensaw when I talked to him this evening, that the folks in the Quebec Breeding Bird Atlas did very well confirming long-eared owls. And long-eared owls are a real challenge for just about any atlas. Most atlases don't end up with a lot of records. And if you look at the results from the Quebec Atlas, they did very well in southern Quebec. And the way they did this was not broadcasting tapes, but waiting till that chick rearing period from, say, mid to late April through June, when you have these hungry young owls sitting there screaming to their parents. Essentially, they're saying, feed me, very loudly. And it carries very well. And so the method that they had was literally they just went out near dusk or a little bit after dusk and listened in the appropriate habitat near conifers, and they did very well. We're trying to see if we can get part of a presentation that they gave on how they did so well at documenting long-eared owls, and the presentation's in French. But if we can get it and use something like Google Translator, or my daughter knows French, get a good translation, we can then dub over it and maybe have a little presentation that we eventually make available on how to go out and try and document breeding long-eared owls for the Atlas. Now's the one that, really got me started in all of this, because I was talking to Adrian about, how do we get some good Boreal owl information for the Atlas? I firmly believe, and I think there's others, that Boreal owls breed in the boreal portions of Maine. They're very difficult to find and document. They're probably relatively rare, but I think if we work hard at it and do it the right way, there's a good chance that we could find the first documentation of Boreal owls breeding in the state of Maine.
Quick interruption, Dave.
Yep.
By the way, so there is some prizes on the line, and Boreal owl is always my poster species for this, that individuals who document species never before known to breed in the state of Maine will receive a new pair of Nikon Monarch binoculars. So obviously documenting something that is rare requires a lot of confirming information and supporting evidence. But I just wanted to throw that out there. So especially for this last year of the Atlas, there's binoculars on the line.
So folks, there's incentive.
Pride, right?
Yeah. I can't provide that incentive, but Adrian sure did. These are the summertime records and other, a couple of nest records for Boreal owls near Maine. The two 1920s era records, one in Vermont, one over on Wood Island, come out of Bent's Life Histories of North American Birds. So they're very old, but the Wood Island one was a nest record. There is a breeding record really not too far from Western Maine on Mount Washington from 2001, where there were observations of a fledgling that was not strong enough flighted to have gone really anywhere. So they've done it. They've bred pretty close to the Maine border. There is a summer observation from southern Vermont. There's a 2012 observation just across the border in Quebec. And when I went into the Birds of Maine, come on, computer. Okay, my computer's not advancing again, folks. Give me a minute. There we go. There are two Baxter State Park records that are summertime records of Boreal Owl observations, one in 2003 and one in 2005. And I suspect that there's a very good likelihood that those were members of the breeding pair that someone just happened to see. So I think this can be done. And this is the real challenge for the go-getters that like to go out and work on owls and spend their time out at night. Again, these birds breed early. Courtship starts in March and April. Yeah, there's still snow on the ground. Yeah, it's hard to get around, but we'll have to do our best if we're going to, really make this happen. Incubation is April and May. Chick rearing is May through June. Habitat affinities, you need to look for mature boreal forest, mixed spruce, fir, aspen, and birch. You need that hardwood conifer because that's where your pileatids and flickers are going to build cavities. They tend to require or prefer an open understory. That's why you're looking for the more mature boreal forest stands. You need those pre-existing cavities and snags. So if you're going out there to do callback survey work and you're trying to say, well, where's the best place to do a playback point, you really need to think through the habitat and look for places where you might expect spruce grouse and gray jays and have these older, mature spruce and fir with mixed in with hardwoods. I've been doing a fair amount of reading in a new book I just got, and if you want to get excited about boreal owls, this is the best source of natural history and biology that you can get. It was written by Erkki Kopramaki and Harry, I'm going to butcher that other Finnish name, so I'm not going to try it, but there is a lot of wonderful information about boreal owls in there, mostly from Finland and Europe, but he also refers to the work that's been done in Alaska in the western United States. So just a little bit, if you want to add to your knowledge, get a hold of Erkki's book and read about the boreal owl. So I'm just about ready to really turn this over to Logan here, but to set people up to try and potentially find that first boreal owl breeding record, we did some work with the Atlas data, and we made a list of the blocks that had spruce grouse, gray jays, boreal chickadees, blackback woodpeckers, and then added to that blocks that also had pileated woodpeckers and flickers confirmed in them. And we use that to sort of score the blocks from 0, which is none of those species, to I think the max is 6. 6 species. And there's only a few blocks that have more than 3 of those species occurring in all those blocks. Those are the ones that are coded orange here for high boreal. We figure if people are going to go out and try and find something this rare and this widely distributed we'd like to give them the best chance of success by saying, okay, from our knowledge of bird distribution and habitats, here's where we think the probability is best. All the purple ones have from 1 to 3 of those species. So you can see there's a lot of opportunity out there to go out and do owl surveys, looking for everything from Screech Owls to saw-whets and long ears. And if you really get lucky and you're in the right habitat, you might get a response from a boreal. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity here to help the Maine Atlas. And I've been sort of partnering with the Natural History Observatory, doing migrant saw-whet owl work. And we're going to partner on some nest box studies and that. And I hope this is an introduction to get people excited so that when Logan talks about the monitoring program here, some of you people will be able to get out and go add to the records for these uncommon owls in Maryland. I'm going to stop here, and it's probably time to switch over to Logan. Glenn, did you want to let any questions in the middle here, or do you want to hold them all to the end?
No, we might as well add in a few questions now. Adrian, do you want to cover some of those?
Sure. There's been some great comments and also anecdotes in the chat. Fantastic presentation, Dave. Thank you so much. So one of the first questions that came up was, will any of the owl species reuse the same nest in multiple years?
Sometimes they do. That's seen a lot with Screech Owls. When you put up boxes for Screech Owls, you usually put up 2 or 3 so that the male can roost in one, the female can incubate eggs in the other. And I know a lot of people down by us who have Screech Owls in their box year after year after year. When I had my saw-whet boxes in the Maryland mountains, we would put out small clusters of 5 to 10 boxes. And oftentimes there would always be a bird breeding in the cluster, but from year to year, they were switching boxes on us. Great horned owls regularly, if the nest survives the pounding that the young owlets do to it, they might use it again a second year, but they usually go and try and find somebody other's stick nest to reuse.
And then there was a couple questions that were similar to the same idea. Was, will multiple owls species breed in the same area? In particular, there were questions thinking about some of the larger, more predatory owls that Maine has and our smaller saw-whet and Screech Owls. So if we have barred owls in a territory, for example, will Screech Owls or saw-whets also, could we expect to find them in the same area?
If you have a good resident pair of barred owls, I wouldn't expect to find either a Screech or a saw-whet. I think one of the keys to finding good territories for the smaller owls is them being in places where they're not at risk from barred owls. So I don't think if you got a local barred owl, you have much of a chance of finding a saw-whet owl in particular.
And then I have a couple other notes. I've been making them as I go, but I'll just do one more quickie before we put it over to Logan, and then we'll fill in at the end with more. But do you know of any of the other species of owls, particularly the boreal, where the brancher fledglings are making those really loud begging calls, or is that kind of unique to the long-eareds?
Great horned owl chicks are really notorious for a loud food beg. It sounds like weep, weep, and it can be really obnoxious. So that's a good way to confirm a great horned owl. I think barred owls might do a little bit of the same, but I haven't heard that very often. that might be a good thing for us to look up in the literature and send a note around to all the atlasers, whether you can use food begging calls from barred owls. But it works for long ears. It works for great horns.
I'll jump in here, Dave, just to say that I have had barred owls do similar begging calls. They seem to be raspier than the great horns, but also quite loud. And I think folks have confused those for barn owl vocalizations in the past. So it's important to know the distinction. But yeah, I've heard barred owls doing that. I've seen them doing it. So
food begging owls on like Xenocanto or get them downloaded from Macaulay. That would be a good resource to put on the webpage. So if someone's out there doing atlas work and you hear it, you could go back to the reference on the website. And the other thing to remember is if you're carrying a cell phone, most cell phones have recorders on. And if you hear something like that, record it. And that gives you a chance to get it verified by somebody else or compare it to recordings when you get back home.
Yep. And so that gets to some of the other great comments. So Lance Benner is one of our other star atlasers, and he has a lot of owl expertise as well. And he's been mentioning the same thing, that a lot of these, make sure you get recordings of them. Curious though, Dave, in all of your recent Boreal Owl research and out of that book, was there any mention of loud begging calls from nestling, fledgling Boreals?
Not yet. I'm only about a third of the way through the book.
Okay, not that you found in your research.
No.
So, and I will just mention, so while it's unlikely that especially the larger owls and predatory owls to overlap with the smaller ones, it definitely does happen. There were some comments in the chat. I've heard them in the same location during the breeding season, but just because they are present doesn't mean that they are successfully breeding either. So you can sometimes hear them in the same place, but that's why we have those different tiers of kind of, are they in the same place more than 7 days apart, and then getting even higher in the confirmations. Because barn owls kind of came into the discussion, somebody had asked about barn owls and short-eared owls. I'll table short-eared owls in Maine till the end. We'll get back to that. And I'll just say barn owls have been extirpated from Maine for many years now. So, along the lines, one of the other things that came up, and again, another good reason to make recordings of what you're hearing, particularly if you think you're getting some of these more rare birds. It's really important to have that supporting evidence. A lot of the boreal reports that have come in turned out to be snipe. So just keep that in mind, that there are a lot of things that sound similar, and so let's take advantage of our technology. But okay, I'll table the rest of the discussion till you're done.
A quick note on that is, if you listen to the call of a snipe like beforehand and compare it to a boreal owl and train your ear, they're pretty easy to tell apart once you've trained your ear, because while there's similarities, they're different. It's all yours, right, Logan.
Okie doke. So I'm going to turn off my video here just because I'm getting the unstable internet signal. So I'm going to limit some of my bandwidth use. But I'm here, and you can trust that I'll be just as happy as I look in my little profile. So, all right. Okay, so are you guys able to see my presentation okay?
We are.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'll just give you the quick rundown here on what I'll be covering. I'm going to be focusing sort of on the basics of this owl playback survey that we're running. We have done a couple of these surveys for the last few years, so some of this will be familiar to those of you that are already helping with those playback surveys. But I will note that the protocol has been updated this year. So Dave helped us refine our project design a little bit. It's making it so we can be a little bit more efficient out in the field. And so if you've done them before, do pay attention because some things have changed. Essentially, a lot of the stuff will connect to the Maine Bird Atlas, and I suspect that lots of the folks that are on here today are quite familiar with that. If you're not, I apologize if some of the phrasing that I use is unfamiliar, but you've got many Atlas staff in the chat that can help, answer some questions if you're not sure what I'm talking about. Yep, go ahead, Adrian.
Oh, also, I was just going to mention, if you are not familiar with a lot of the terminology and the project itself, we, as always, every Thursday evening at 6:30 until the middle of March, we also have an Atlas-focused kind of informal Q&A chat available. So if you are new to the Atlas or interested in learning more, just enjoy the owls tonight and then join us tomorrow evening at 6:30. And Doug, could you do me a favor and put that, if you think is it safe to share a Zoom link in the chat without worry of Zoom bombing? I would suggest, if so, I'll defer to you on that. But if so,
I put a link in there, Adrian.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thanks, Glenn.
All right. So this project is in some ways a sub-project of the Maine Bird Atlas project. It's one of the special species projects that's working to gather observations of species that might otherwise fall through the cracks that aren't getting picked up by your conventional birding activity or through the the more standardized point counts. It is a playback survey. That is, it depends on playing and broadcasting recordings of vocalizing owls. And, with that, there are some pros and some cons. The pro being that owls tend to be quite reactive to vocalizations of other owls, whether that's their own species or another species. And then the con would be, if you've got an owl that's being drawn over to your broadcasting site, well, then it's not doing its typical breeding activities, foraging and nest guarding, maintaining a territory. So with that in mind, this project was designed to limit any disturbance on any one owl. And, we advise that playback is used sparingly and responsibly, and that it's used only while we're conducting these standardized surveys. The structure of the survey points, which I'll explain, where points land in more detail, but the structure is set up such that the points are at least 1,000 meters apart. That's so that we're not repeatedly disturbing the same owl, and recordings are never repeated at the same site on the same night, and we actually space it out so that we've got at least 7 days between each survey at a given site. Okay, so we're going to cover the who, how, when, and wheres of this project. The who being the species that we're looking for, how to conduct the playback surveys, when to conduct your surveys, and where those surveys should be conducted. So the who, you might have guessed, are some of those harder to find species that Dave talked about. So we've got northern saw-whet owls, which we've done, as Dave showed, a pretty good job of documenting, but the area could be expanded. Boreal owl, the map is wide open, never before been documented. And the long-eared owl. So long-eared owl we've got a handful of records, but you look at their range maps, this is supposedly one of the most widespread owl species, and we have very few records. So these species are challenging to gather observations of using conventional methods, and for a variety of reasons. And so we're going to use playback to hopefully draw some of them out and get some responses. You'll note that the more common species like barred owl and great horned owl are not included in the list of the species that we're looking for. That is to say that they're not included as vocalizing species on the playback recordings that we'll be using. We are already documenting these birds quite well, and they're also predator species on some of these smaller owls, and so we're not looking to draw them into these sites where these smaller owls are potentially vocalizing. That being said, if you do hear those owls, we of course want to capture that information. So if I just ran a survey recently and I had a barred owl, I noted it down just as I would anything else. So we're still interested in the information. They're not the focus of this project. So conducting our surveys, how are they conducted? So they're quite simple. You'll need a smartphone or an MP3 player and some sort of portable speaker, whether that's a wireless speaker or something that you hook up to your phone with an auxiliary cable. And you'll use these two things to broadcast a recording that we will supply you with. Each survey takes 12 minutes in total, where you'll be listening for owls, and it's made up of both listening periods and short 20-second clips of each of those focal species. Once you've completed that 12-minute survey and noted down anything that you've heard, you'd move on to the next site, into the Maine Bird Atlas portal, and that's regardless of safe dates. So all of the records from this project can be uploaded to eBird, and that includes zero bird surveys, which are, it's very possible you'll go out and do a survey and not pick up anything at all. And that remains highly valuable information, because we're just as interested in knowing where these birds are not, and we're putting an effort, as we are in where they are being observed. So there is lots of guidance available to you online at maine.gov/birdatlas for submitting records, whether that's through a smartphone, uploading things on your computer, or using paper forms. So Glenn sent me an email the other day, and I thought he put it well. So the owl surveys that are conducted between now and March 15th are part of a 2-for-1 special. So that is the effort that you put in counts towards both winter bird atlas effort and the breeding bird atlas effort. So you're contributing to both parts of the project when you are doing these surveys. And I'll reinforce something that was just said, but that is, so some of these species that are either quite rare or difficult to document because of their secretive nature, like the long-eared owl, Boreal Owl, if you find Screech Owl well outside of its known range. Definitely, when possible, try to capture a recording of these birds vocalizing, take down notes of what you've seen and heard. And if you find these, reach out to the project coordinator, reach out to Glenn or Adrian, and we can ensure that those birds are properly documented. Oh, and when completing your survey, just include a note in the comment section of the checklist saying that it is an owl playback survey. All right, so moving on to the when. So over the course of the field season, you'd be conducting surveys 3 times at each of your points. One survey is conducted in March, and then 2 surveys in April, separated by at least 7 days. The timing is 30 minutes after sunset until midnight, so anywhere within that window, and under the right environmental conditions. So you'd want lower winds, no steady rain or snow. A passing squall is fine, but certainly don't go out in a snowstorm. Always put your safety first there. Okay, and moving on to the where. So you'll have that map at this presentation. I'll bring it up again in a moment, but there are a number of blocks that we've identified as priorities for conducting these owl surveys. Those can all be, adopted and marked as covered. Once you've adopted a block, you're going to want to pre-scout your blocks using the Atlas block maps, which I'll bring up examples in a moment. And then you'll want to scout those blocks during the day if you can. And when you're doing that, you can look for areas of suitable habitat. You can look for good places to park, which is a challenge in the winter a lot of the time. Identify private property. Obviously, don't trespass for any reason while you're conducting these surveys. But the surveys should be conducted along roadways in a variety of habitat types. Like this picture of Katahdin, because you can see so many different habitats in just one view. So you'll want to hit on all the different types of habitat in your adopted block. Another thing to note is that access can vary throughout the season. So you might get in there early and find that a roadway hasn't been plowed yet. And you might have to time your surveys a little later. And you want to find that out during the day, not the night when you're trying to run around and conduct some of these surveys. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, again, special note on the Boreal Owls in that they've never been confirmed as breeding within the state. We know that they're secretive and that they breed early, so we need to get out perhaps a little bit earlier for them. And then we've identified a number of areas as priorities for these birds specifically. And you'll see here's that map I was just making reference to. So all of these blocks are color coded. These are all great blocks for conducting surveys for owls. The protocol is the same regardless of where you're surveying, but if you're interested in looking specifically for Boreal Owl, you'll want to go and access those sites that are identified as high priority or regular Boreal sites. But any one of those blocks could produce some really interesting records this year. So if you want to adopt a local block, that's just as helpful. That could well be where one of our long-eared owls is hanging out. So when I was talking about pre-scouting, I mentioned that you can use the Atlas block maps. There are both aerial maps and topographic maps that you can look at for identifying different sites. I just picked this one. This is my own local block, and you can see there's a variety of habitat types, just in this more populated area, lots of agricultural areas. But using a combination of these two resources is really helpful when you want to identify sites within your adopted block for conducting surveys. And here's another view. So this is looking at a block that has, a little bit more homogeneous cover, but even here you can see there is quite a variety of different environments in which you could conduct these surveys. You've got higher elevation areas and wetlands and forested sites. There's tracks with utility lines. So you've got open area and then lots and lots of forest cover. So regardless of what the block looks like, there's some lots of interesting places to go and conduct your surveys. Just a note on safety, it's a lot of common sense. You'll want to make sure that you're visible if you're out at night. You wear a reflective vest, have a headlamp and flashlight. As I mentioned before, you're going to want to scout these blocks during the day and identify, safe places to park so you don't end up stranded somewhere in the middle of the night. Let someone know where you're going, or potentially bring a partner along that can ride along with you, and always go out with your maps of your atlas blocks. And I always leave some basic instructions on where I'm headed with a family member, so that if I'm headed off in the middle of the night, they have an idea of where I am if they don't hear from me. And another thing you should always anticipate when you're doing this type of work at night is that people will stop to check on you. That's quite common. So anticipate that. Most people are usually pretty delighted when they hear you're doing an owl survey and are just making sure that you're okay. But yeah, set up your volunteer placard. We've got a printout that you can put in your car window when you're conducting surveys that's available in the volunteer handbook for the Atlas. So that's a useful thing to do. So that's the basic rundown on that. I will just put in a quick plug for a appeal that Maine Natural History Observatory is putting on. We're doing a fundraiser to fund some owl surveys this winter, and folks can help support us. If you're not able to conduct surveys, you can still support surveys and help ensure that they're getting done. So there's information at mainnaturalhistory.org/owls on that program. Another way to support owls is by adopting them as part of the Atlas's Adopt a Species program. There are still owls that can be adopted. Those funds go on to help support the special species projects. There's a handful, so that's another great way. And if you do that, you'll end up, your name can get published in the final version of the Atlas. And another plug here for becoming a member of the Maine Natural History Observatory. We work on a variety of projects. So whether you're interested in plants or in birds, or museum collections or field guides, there's lots of great projects that we're working on, and lots of opportunities for you to contribute to those. So yeah, certainly encourage you becoming a member. And that's it for me, although we're certainly open for questions, Dave and I both. And that's that.
Oops. Sorry. I meant to start my video and pressed mute a few times. That was so great, Logan, and the two of you really blended that together really well. I was thrilled. We had an amazing turnout. And just for those 113 still with us, we maxed out at like 187.
Yeah, that's impressive.
The 190s. That's fantastic. So I'm really glad this was recorded. As mentioned in the chat earlier, this recording will be available on the Maine Natural History Observatory website probably in a couple days. And then a lot of the details about things related to the Atlas, but also these particular surveys. There's been a lot of dialogue in the chat with links. And just for folks who are maybe watching this as a recording, you're not going to have access to the chat. So keep in mind, those are the kind of things that we do during the Atlas Q&As. We will specifically kind of screen share, and we can walk you through how to find these different sites and resources that we're providing if you miss out on the links. So we're really trying to make ourselves as available as possible. There haven't been too many other questions. Oh, 193. Somebody said they caught participants at 193. Super. I'm actually really impressed that the woodpeckers nearly rivaled. I expected the owls to do a little better, but I think between the draw of Bob Duchesne and the woodpeckers, it was darn close. I mean, we were up to what, 160 or 170 for the woodpeckers, but so this is fantastic. And yeah, so I don't see too many more questions coming in. I think I'll definitely at the latest wrap it up by 8:00. So feel free, there's still some time if you want to ask some questions. I do want to revisit both the barn owl and the short-eared owl. I'll pitch it to you first, Logan, since you did a lot of the natural history stuff. But in case you don't know the exact dates, because I don't know them off the top of my head, like for the barn owl in particular, I have Doug on standby. But do you happen to know the last year when we had barn owls in the state of Maine?
I don't, not off the top of my head. I know it's been a while. I know I've seen the record in Peter Vickery's book. So yeah, Doug, by all means, chime in if you've got it.
I can unmute myself. Sorry, I'm in my living room with my mom here, so I'm not going to turn my video on. But the latest record I know of was actually, you always hear these wonderful stories of like, we had barn owls, in our barn back, whenever. And there's so many of those, as you guys were saying, like quite often people hear those fledgling barred owls that sound a lot like barn. And so this one that had essentially been almost dismissed until this guy actually came out with a photo. So he's got this photo. It's from August of 2004. I think it's in eBird if people want to look it up. But it, sure enough, it's a 100% barn owl sitting in a barn, and it was in Albion, which is Kennebec County. But that was definitely the last, what I would truly call documented record. So to just add to that idea that, they get reported almost every year, and every time they do, they end up being barred owls. So good to keep a lookout, but they're just not here.
Can you speak to what we think happened to them?
My understanding is that it's been quite a bit of habitat loss. Like we're on the northern edge of their range. Barn owl's an interesting one when you look at kind of, you don't have to go too much further south, really out of New England, for them to start to become a more abundant bird. So I think there's a combination of there's an aspect of it's not a great place for them to be. Like the few places that they're holding on in New England are out on Nantucket has one of the last populations I'm aware of. I think Rhode Island still has some regular ones. But like that's about it for New England, and I'm sure there's probably some combination of changing habitats here, where like those big open spaces of the what once was more abundant in Maine's agriculture is probably thinning out. And I guess I'll stop speculating because I don't know exactly what caused them to retreat, but they were never a abundant bird here anyway. Is maybe the important thing to say. You look at historical literature. You can count the number of records, despite there being a few like known breeding attempts. They were never abundant.
Yeah. Did you have something, Dave?
Adrian, allow me for a minute. Barn owls are primarily a grassland owl. Where you end up finding them is any place you really have good open grasslands where you're going to have meadow vole populations. That can be salt marshes along the East Coast. My guess is if you go back far enough in Maine to when New England had more abundant farms and pasture lands, that you might have had barn owls then, but as New England has reforested and the amount of open habitat is closed in, that's probably the driving force that has resulted in barn owls now being pretty rare to non-existent in southern Maine.
Which is a great segue to short-eared owls, who share a similar affinity for that kind of habitat. So, Logan,
the other grassland owl.
yeah, did you cover them in your natural history of Maine? And then after short-eareds, we'll get into Tessa's question just about conservation in general, which is really kind of interesting too when you think about these edge of range species like we were just talking about with barn owls. That's definitely a factor as biologists and managers that we have to take into consideration, is how to put resources towards these edge of range species that may be blinking out for reasons that aren't necessarily due to land use necessarily, but just something else to think about. But back to short-eareds. So what can you tell us about them, Logan?
Yeah, so we did cover them in our other presentation. The story is very similar, as you say, with barn owl. Certainly folks are encouraged to go out and look in those areas. But if you look at eBird, most of the records that you see for short-eared owl, for short-eared owl are winter birds, winter records, and migrants. But there are a handful of breeding records, early breeding records in those more traditional areas where you'd find those, the grasslands. But a lot of those records are decades old now, but still worth looking into if you're in the right habitat. Heading out at dusk could be useful. But yeah.
And I will just mention links have been posted in the chat for finding Logan's earlier owl natural history presentation from last year. That can be found by going to the Maine Natural History Observatory website and clicking on owls. Actually, why don't we end on the conservation piece? But before we get to that, there was also a question. Can you just speak briefly, Logan, and maybe even screen share, getting to the information that we have available for nest boxes? And if people are interested in either building their own or deploying some, and what the status of our supply is this year, if we are still giving and looking for homes for some of these boxes.
Sure. Yeah. So all of the information on the nest box project can be found on the Maine Natural History Observatory website. Let me pull that up now. With regard to our supply of boxes, so we do have some boxes available. For the most part, those boxes are for kestrels at this point. We have a few small boxes for bluebirds, and then we have a handful, I believe, in total, near 10 boxes available for kestrels. A note on so in the past, we used similar boxes for kestrels and for saw-whet owl. We worked with Dave this year, and he provided us with some plans for boxes that he's used that have been quite successful and perhaps better suited for saw-whet owl. And so that information is available on our website. Now let me bring this up. All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. So this is the Maine Natural History Observatory website. If you go on here and go to Explore, down to Birds, there is a nest box monitoring page. And on this page, there's information on all of the projects. And then within that, we've got plans and handbooks for each of these, different cavity nesters, or we also have a cliff swallow project as well. But so you can go on there. Let me pull this up. So we just revised this year and sent it off to all of our existing volunteers. It's got tons of information on nest box monitoring specifically for owls, and detailed instructions on where to install boxes, when to conduct checks, and reporting results. And then right here at the bottom, you'll see there's a section all on plans. It'll tell you exactly what you need if you want to put together boxes. We do get boxes. We have boxes that become available, and when we do, we do send those out to folks for free. We don't have any of these new boxes yet, though we may have some available shortly. So I'll keep you posted on that. But in the meantime, yes, we do have boxes available for kestrels if you're in an open area, agricultural area, or near grasslands. We have bluebird boxes available. So you just need to send me an email, and I can set you up with all of your materials. But Dave kind of refined this nest box down to limiting as much waste as possible. So you're able to construct a box just using 2 boards, and it'll be exciting to get those out. And we'll be working with Dave to get boxes installed down east as part of a large nest box monitoring project. So if you're down east, there'll be an opportunity to work with that project as well.
Okay, so I will just read. Doug filled in a quick blank for the short-eared. He says last winter was pretty good. An eruptive year for short-eared with a few lingering into the spring, April, giving us hope that we'd get a breeding record. But alas, we are still looking. And the last breeding, he thinks, was up at Christina Reservoir in a Aroostook. And then in our last 3 minutes, I'll just put it to you, Dave and Logan, and then we'll close on this. And if you have any lingering questions that we did not get to, please feel free to visit us on Thursday evenings for our Atlas Q&As. And and Doug says the last breeding of short-eareds was like in the 60s, long time ago. So let's close. Dave, you go first, and then Logan. A question from a participant that prompted some, interesting discussion in the chat as well, because she kind of posed it to everybody. I don't kestrel. I don't know. She, they, let's be proper. That says, what does owl conservation mean to you?
That's a good one. It's really about good, secure habitats and making certain that you have the right variety of habitats across a region or a state. You can't expect to have all of them in any one part of Maine, but if Maine manages its habitat diversity well, you'll have a good guild of owls. For things like barn owls that have been potentially extirpated, you can provide nest boxes on the sides of barns as long as there is that's interesting. Are we still going, or did we die?
We're still going, I think.
Well, I've got this funny Zoom phone thing in front of me.
Yeah, it came up for me too. I don't know.
If you had open fields, you might be able to see if there's still barn owls about by putting out some barn owl boxes. But really, in a state like Maine, it's kind of hard to add conservation to them. The other big owl conservation issue has to do with climate change and all of us being cognizant of our lifestyles, because things like snowy owls are their future is sort of in the balance, because what happens in the Arctic could spell some very hard times for them. And that's where, people say, well, what can I do for something like a snowy owl? Well, we can all do better with how we use carbon sources and things like that. And that might be one of the bigger owl conservation things going on right now, that takes it away from our backyards and makes it a global issue.
And
Cheers, Logan.
Yeah. So, yeah, in terms of, what it means to me, I very much subscribe to the idea of things, in nature having inherent value. I think about my favorite bird is a whippoorwill, which is a bird that I've, collectively seen. I could count on one hand. I think there's a lot of utility in protecting these things, but I think ethically, there's value in conserving these things that we may never see or hear, just in their innate value. But I think it is a lot about thinking about all these different things that we can do to protect these species. There are some active things we can do, like putting up nest boxes or participating in these types of projects. There are a lot of things that we can do to help conserve these species, and I think we should take those measures and value everything that we have in our landscape, with the idea that they're both valuable on their own, but also of great value to us for a variety of reasons. So, with the idea of keeping all of the parts intact is the best way to move forward.
all right. I guess with that, we will say good night, and many, many thanks to you all for joining, to you, Logan and Dave, for your time and expertise and putting together great talks. And we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, Glenn, are we all set?
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording now.